So I've made several videos now on the PlayStation Vita, and I think it's a system that Sony kind of left behind a little too soon, and some of that had to do with the success that they saw with the PlayStation 4, combined with the slow sales that they saw with the Vita, and they basically had to pick which system they wanted to have their first-party studios develop for. A lot of that has already been covered before all over the internet now, but something has happened recently that really for the Vita is a massive upgrade now heading into 2023, since we kind of know where Sony stands with the PlayStation Vita, and that is they're ready to leave this thing behind. But fortunately, the homebrew community appears to just be getting started, and now it's easier than ever to unlock your Vita, and I want to talk a little bit about that here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure you like it and subscribe below if you're new. So we know in 2021, Sony moved to close down the Vita, PlayStation 3, and PlayStation Portable stores, but decided to reverse course specifically on the Vita and PS3. The PSP store, unfortunately, did end up getting shut down, but a lot of this was due to backlash online, and now we all look at it and it's pretty obvious how Sony feels about the Vita. They're looking to put it completely behind them in the past. It's legacy hardware for them, but at this time, they don't even really want to support any of the digital purchases for games, which is going to leave that physical market to get pretty expensive overall in the long run, even though it kind of already is now. Picture it where it could be 5 or 10 years into the future when you can't even buy them digitally and the store is gone. Which is why at this point, it's probably something that the homebrew community will be taking up going forward. And recently with this new breakthrough when it comes to hacking the Vita and unlocking it, it's become incredibly easy. To the point now where you go to a website and it'll install custom firmware. This entire process, I'm not kidding, takes 2 to 3 minutes at the most. And a lot of that is just waiting for the Vita to do most of the work and reboot a few times. See, before you would have to go through quite a few steps, and it would involve a PC, and it was something that could be messed up or would at least look daunting enough to where someone wouldn't even try. They would just say, nah, you know what, that's not really something I'm going to attempt, and just kind of move on. Now it's just incredibly easy, and I don't know how long necessarily this will be in play, considering Sony is, I'm sure, aware of it and will look to update the Vita randomly for system stability and maybe get rid of it. But at this time, it still works, and I think it's the best way to unlock the Vita. It does work for all the different Vita models. That includes the 1000 OLED, 2000, and then the Vita TV. I believe with the 1000, you do need at least a proprietary memory card from Sony to get things started, because it does not have the onboard storage that the 2000 and the Vita TV has. But once you unlock the Vita through this method, you can eliminate the most annoying part about the whole deal, and that is that memory card. There's something called the SD2 Vita, and this is something that sort of comes with Henkaku, where you can enable it in the settings. And there are some steps to take here, and it'll include copying over any files you have on that memory card to an SD card. That's right, it takes a micro SD card. I dropped in a 256 gigabyte card, and from there, I've been able to save all kinds of applications and games to it. That does include Vita titles. The ones I'm showing here, I own these games. Look, I understand where we are in the market with Vita titles, and as long as the digital store is up, there are at least ways to get these games easily enough. But I understand there is a future coming up where there most likely will not be a digital storefront. At that point, you're at the mercy of the prices for the secondhand market. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who are going to look around and just go, well, I'll figure out a way to download these games. Well, there you go. It's technically unlocked and you can do that. But like I said, as of now, I own quite a few Vita titles. And for me, there was a lot of convenience in the fact that I don't have to change my cards out physically or anything, again, in a collection that I'm sure will just continue to appreciate in value over time. But it's pretty cool to have all these titles just on the home screen, and you just jump around from each one, because even if I had them digitally, there's no way I'd be able to have all of them downloaded like this here. I would have to make space on the, let's face it, 8 gigabyte card at most. Once you got up into the 32 gigabyte card range, you were spending some serious money, so the vast majority of us probably rolled with 4 or 8 gigabyte cards. Now, you can use the Vita for Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo, Dreamcast, any of these games. It works well enough. The N64, not as much, but I would only really get the Vita if you don't have one yet, specifically for PS1, PSP, and Vita titles, all right? I don't know if I would go out there and grab it for anything else, really, in terms of emulation, considering there are many other handhelds you can get right now that are more capable than the Vita, just better specs overall, and are designed to play some of those legacy games from other platforms. But the Vita does play PS1, PSP, and obviously Vita games very, very well. And I mean, there are still quite a few titles that are going to be most likely left on the Vita forever. So I do believe it's a good idea to pick up a Vita now to check some of those titles out. You know what? The Vita still feels surprisingly current, given it came out more than a decade ago now. If I handed it to you and told you, oh, it came out 2 or 3 years ago, you'd probably believe me. However, there is one thing that's pretty cool about the homebrew community currently that is becoming more active, it seems, with the Vita, and that has to do with titles that were originally released on Android devices that are being completely ported over to the Vita. Now, of course, using ARM either way, so they are making that push to essentially move the instruction set and all of this over to the Vita, and you have to get the game files for it. But Dead Space, Mass Effect, Crazy Taxi, the list goes on and on and on. There's a surprising amount of games, some of those 3D Final Fantasy titles that came under quite a bit of scrutiny. These are all available to check out on the Vita, and the reason I like it is the Vita is definitely set up to play these games better with the physical controls, the buttons, the joysticks, all of this. Whereas when I played some of these titles on Android, it feels like a long time ago, whether it's on a tablet or a phone, the touchscreen you just never really feel that connected with the game. So having these titles available on the Vita, it's pretty nice in terms of the variety, especially if you're a Mass Effect fan or a Dead Space fan. These are some pretty cool versions probably to try out for the first time. There's also one aspect to the PlayStation Vita TV that I may check out in the future in a dedicated video, as there are games that have been completely cut off from the Vita TV in terms of the overall library that Sony never enabled. There's basically a list where they said this game can work, this game can work, this game can't. And I think some of that had to do with the quirky features of the handheld Vita with the back touchscreen, things like that wouldn't necessarily translate over the best to the Vita TV. Although I guess you'd be using a DualShock 4, so you have the touch pad on that. But either way, there are games that they decided to just block from it. However, when the Vita TV is jailbroken, you could enable these games. For better or worse, as I said, some points, I believe there are ways you can't get past them, but there are some that people would actually map the controls to a DualShock 4 and allow you to get past certain aspects to it that maybe Sony could have, but they just didn't want to put as much time into what was a very niche device with that TV. And so I really can't recommend it enough to check out the Vita now in 2023, especially after this breakthrough when it comes to opening up the Vita completely. And yes, being able to take part in a library of games that Sony is no longer interested in really distributing at all, and be able to bypass the proprietary memory cards that are also seemingly going up in price consistently is just a really, really cool benefit. But let me know what you guys think about all this stuff down below. And if you have unlocked your Vita and tried out some of the homebrew stuff, what are some of your favorite apps? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.